The energy inside the packed auditorium was almost electric. Supporters, critics, and a buzzing media presence filled every seat. Candace Owens stood confidently at the podium, eyes glinting as cameras panned over the crowd. The night's debate was being streamed live, promising fireworks between two of the most outspoken voices in American politics. Across the stage, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett adjusted her microphone with a calm poise that contrasted Candace's charged energy. She gave the crowd a quick, reassuring nod, then glanced over at Candace, a silent acknowledgement that both women understood the stakes. The moderator's voice rang out. Next topic, criminal justice reform. Congresswoman Crockett, you have the floor. Jasmine began, her voice steady and direct. If we want safer communities, we have to address root causes: poverty, education, opportunity. We can't solve this with slogans. We need action. Candace smirked, waiting for her chance to pounce. The moment Jasmine finished, Candace leaned into the microphone. Congresswoman Crockett, with all due respect, Candace said, her tone sharp, isn't it a little hypocritical to talk about action when your voting record says otherwise? You've said a lot, but what have you actually done? A few gasps rose from the crowd. Candace pressed on, her voice rising, it's time we stop pretending words mean anything without real results. And I think the audience deserves to know, have you ever taken responsibility for your failures in office? The room went quiet. The cameras focused on Jasmine, waiting for her reaction. She didn't flinch. Instead, she looked Candace directly in the eye, a slight, knowing smile forming as the moment built to a boiling point. Jasmine Crockett let the silence stretch, meeting Candace's gaze with cool composure. She could feel the eyes of the audience on her, and the tension in the room was almost tangible. She leaned forward, her voice calm but resonant. Candace, I appreciate your concern about results. It's important for public figures to be held accountable. So let's talk about accountability, not just sound bites. The crowd murmured in anticipation. Jasmine continued, since my first day in office, I've authored legislation that's put millions into after-school programs in my district, programs that have kept kids off the streets and given them a chance at a real future. I've worked with law enforcement and community leaders, not just for photo ops, but to actually implement reforms that reduce unnecessary arrests. She paused and looked at the audience. The numbers are public. Anyone can see the crime rates and graduation rates in my district have improved. And I've been transparent about every vote, every mistake, and every lesson learned. I don't hide from my record, I stand on it. A ripple of applause spread through the audience, cutting through the tension. Candace tried to interject, but Jasmine held up a hand. But since we're talking about accountability, let's look at everyone's record on this stage tonight, not just mine. The moderator raised his eyebrows, suddenly sensing the tables had started to turn. Candace Owens stiffened, her prepared notes suddenly seeming less useful. Jasmine's pivot had caught her off guard, and the crowd was clearly leaning in to see what would happen next. Jasmine glanced at Candace, then at the moderator. Let's be real with people. Candace, you've made a career out of calling others out, but rarely do you talk about the consequences of some of your own rhetoric, how it impacts the communities you claim to champion. A hush fell. Jasmine's voice stayed measured. A few months ago, you spoke at a rally where your statements about criminal justice reform were, let's say, dismissive. Since then, I've gotten letters from families who've been hurt by a system that still needs changing. Some of them said they felt more hopeless after watching that rally. Candace's jaw tightened. The cameras captured every nuance. Jasmine didn't let up. But instead of doubling down, I invited some of those families to come here tonight. They're in the audience right now. And if you want to talk about accountability, I think they deserve to ask you a few questions about what you stand for, too. The room erupted, applause, surprise, a surge of phones raised to record. Candace looked momentarily rattled, her plan for a staged takedown suddenly crumbling in real time. The moderator leaned forward, intrigued. Ms. Owens, would you like to respond, or shall we hear from the audience? Candace, for the first time all night, hesitated. Candace Owens, usually quick with a retort, glanced nervously toward the audience. For a fleeting moment, her trademark confidence flickered. She adjusted her blazer, buying a second to collect herself. Of course, she said finally, forcing a tight smile. I'm happy to hear from anyone who wants to ask questions. That's what democracy is about, right? The moderator nodded, scanning the crowd. We have time for 2 questions. Would any of the guests Congresswoman Crockett mentioned like to speak? A young woman stood up, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger. Ms. Owens, my brother was sentenced to 5 years for something minor. We listened to your speech. It made us feel like people like him, people from our neighborhoods, don't matter. Do you ever think about what your words mean to people who feel invisible? Candace opened her mouth, but Jasmine held the woman's gaze and nodded supportively, signaling she had the floor. The room was utterly silent. Candace finally replied, her tone measured but less sure, I'm sorry if my words made you feel that way. My goal is to push for personal responsibility. But I never intend to make anyone feel invisible. The woman's eyes filled with tears. We want responsibility. But we need fairness, too. The audience murmured in agreement, many nodding. The moderator turned to Jasmine. Congresswoman Crockett, would you like to add anything? Jasmine stood, her voice ringing out, words can build up or break down. Leaders don't just have microphones, they have a responsibility. I hear you, and I promise to keep fighting for fairness. Applause broke out, louder, longer this time. Candace glanced down, her plan to shame Jasmine now completely unraveled. The applause echoed, growing into a standing ovation from one corner of the auditorium. Jasmine Crockett gave the young woman a reassuring nod, then turned to face Candace directly, her voice calm but unmistakably resolute. I want to thank you, Candace, Jasmine said, because holding each other accountable is important. But tonight, I hope we all learn that accountability goes both ways. It's not about shaming, it's about understanding and improving together. Candace managed a polite smile, but it was clear she'd lost her footing. Her signature bravado was replaced by a quiet tension as she glanced at her notes, now irrelevant to the new direction the conversation had taken. The moderator interjected, sensing the seismic shift. Ladies and gentlemen, what we've seen tonight is exactly what this country needs: honest dialogue, humility, and a willingness to listen. Congresswoman Crockett, thank you for reminding us of the power of compassion and results. He turned to Candace, giving her a chance to recover. Ms. Owens, any final thoughts? Candace took a breath. All I'll say is, I still believe in personal responsibility. But tonight showed me there's room for compassion in that conversation, too. It wasn't a concession, but it was a moment of rare vulnerability. As the debate drew to a close, the audience rose again, this time united in applause, not just for the politicians, but for the people whose voices had finally been heard. Jasmine stepped off the stage to meet the families she'd invited, exchanging hugs and quiet words of gratitude. Candace exited more slowly, deep in thought, the lesson lingering with her as the cameras faded to black. As the auditorium emptied and the buzz of the night faded into the halls, Jasmine Crockett lingered backstage, shaking hands with supporters and exchanging heartfelt thanks with the families who'd spoken up. Journalists hovered nearby, eager for a soundbite, but Jasmine kept her focus on the people who mattered most, those whose stories had changed the entire tone of the evening. Meanwhile, Candace Owens walked briskly toward the exit, her entourage in tow. For once, she declined interviews, choosing instead to reflect quietly on the encounter. Her social media team hovered anxiously, unsure how to spin what the world had just witnessed. By morning, the headlines told the story: Candace Owens' attempt to shame Crockett backfires spectacularly, audience applauds Jasmine Crockett's powerful stand for accountability, debate night turns into lesson on empathy and leadership, clips of Jasmine's calm rebuttal and the audience member's emotional question went viral, sparking new conversations nationwide about the real meaning of leadership and responsibility. For Jasmine, the moment was never about winning a debate. It was about opening doors, for dialogue, for empathy, and for change. As she prepared for another day in Congress, her resolve was stronger than ever. Candace, too, had been changed by the encounter. The next time she stood before a crowd, her message carried a new note, one that recognized not just the need for accountability, but for understanding and humility, too. And somewhere in America, families who'd felt invisible saw themselves reflected on that stage, knowing that for at least one night, their voices had truly mattered. In the days following the debate, the political world was buzzing. Commentators dissected every moment, while social media exploded with hashtags like #CrockettClapback and #OwensBackfire. Late-night hosts replayed the most dramatic clips, and even critics who usually disagreed with Jasmine Crockett admitted she had handled the moment with exceptional poise. A week later, Jasmine received a letter at her congressional office. It was from the young woman who had spoken out during the debate. "Dear Congresswoman Crockett, thank you for giving us a voice. My family has never felt seen before. You didn't just speak for us, you listened. That changed everything for my brother and me. With gratitude, Mariah H." Jasmine smiled as she read the letter, feeling the weight and the purpose of her work. As for Candace Owens, the experience didn't disappear. During her next podcast, she addressed the incident directly. "I still believe in personal responsibility," Candace said, her tone more measured than usual. "But I realize now how important it is to listen, especially to those who felt unheard. That's something I'm taking to heart." In a rare moment of mutual respect, Jasmine Crockett publicly acknowledged Candace's reflection. "It takes courage to listen, and even more to change," she posted on her social media. "Our country needs more of that." For a brief moment, the debate had transcended politics, turning a clash of personalities into a national lesson on humility, courage, and the true meaning of public service. In the weeks that followed, the impact of that night continued to ripple through political circles and everyday conversations alike. News outlets highlighted the unusual display of vulnerability and grace from both women, calling it a rare reminder that leadership could be both strong and empathetic. At a community town hall, Jasmine Crockett was approached by local activists and parents, many of whom had watched the debate. "You made us proud," one father said. "It felt like, for once, someone up there actually cared about what we go through." Jasmine listened closely, collecting their stories, determined to carry their concerns into real legislative action. The young woman, Mariah, became a youth advocate herself, inspired by the encouragement she received on that stage. Meanwhile, Candace Owens took her own lesson on the road, addressing the importance of listening in her next speeches. Though some of her critics remained skeptical, a growing number of followers noted her more balanced tone. For a fleeting moment, the debate's aftermath shifted the national conversation, from division and blame to dialogue and shared responsibility. The video of Jasmine and Mariah went on to be shown in schools and community centers as an example of standing up, speaking out, and listening, no matter who you are or where you come from. And in the end, what started as an attempted takedown became a catalyst for change, proving that sometimes, the greatest victories come not from silencing your opponent, but from hearing one another out. Months passed, but the echoes of that debate night lingered. The confrontation between Candace Owens and Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a headline, it had become a case study, referenced in university classes on rhetoric, media, and ethics. At political forums across the country, young people quoted Jasmine's words about accountability and compassion. Community leaders played clips from the debate to illustrate the power of empathy in leadership. Mariah, the young woman who had spoken out, began working with local nonprofits to support families impacted by harsh sentencing laws. Inspired by her moment on stage, she launched a mentorship program for teens, encouraging them to use their voices for change. Candace Owens, meanwhile, gradually reshaped her platform. She began holding roundtable discussions with families and advocates, sometimes inviting those who disagreed with her most. Her brand of advocacy didn't change overnight, but there was a noticeable shift, one that even her critics admitted was a step toward greater understanding. Jasmine Crockett continued her work in Congress, more determined than ever to bridge divides. She championed new bipartisan initiatives focused on criminal justice reform, often reminding colleagues of the night when the nation watched two adversaries choose dialogue over discord. And so, the story of that evening lived on, not as a tale of humiliation or defeat, but as a lesson in humility, growth, and the unexpected power of listening. By the end of the year, the legacy of that fateful debate had reached far beyond politics. News networks occasionally replayed the footage as a rare example of civility and transformation on the public stage. Think pieces appeared in major publications, with headlines like, "When Listening Changed the Debate," and, "A Viral Moment That Sparked Real Change." Jasmine Crockett was invited to speak at universities, where she encouraged the next generation to never underestimate the power of a quiet voice in a loud room. Her words became a rallying cry for activists who believed in progress through both action and understanding. For Candace Owens, the experience had quietly transformed her own approach. She launched a new segment on her show dedicated to elevating stories from communities she once overlooked, opening the floor to real conversations, even with those who disagreed with her. It wasn't always easy, and not every exchange was friendly, but the willingness to listen made a difference. Mariah's youth mentorship program flourished. Young people inspired by her bravery began to organize forums in their own neighborhoods, sharing their stories and finding hope in solidarity. For a moment, headlines and hashtags faded, but the real impact endured in everyday lives, in the changed tone of town halls, in the dignity restored to overlooked families, and in the bridges quietly built between people who once talked past each other. And in the hearts of all who witnessed that night, the lesson remained clear: true leadership doesn't just speak, it listens. As time passed, the debate night that began with confrontation was remembered for something far greater, a turning point. It showed that even the sharpest of rivals could spark genuine change, not by overpowering each other, but by stepping back and truly hearing what needed to be heard. Jasmine Crockett, looking back, often said that what happened on that stage was a reminder: sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stand your ground with kindness. Her approach became a model for others, politicians, activists, and young people learning how to lead with both strength and empathy. Candace Owens, having faced her own moment of reckoning, was not the same as before. She didn't lose her conviction, but she gained a new respect for the stories behind the statistics. In interviews, she was open about how that night forced her to rethink her methods. "I realized," she said, "that the loudest voice isn't always the right one. Sometimes the best argument is to listen, learn, and grow." Mariah, now a rising voice in youth advocacy, looked back on her question as a catalyst not just for others, but for her own courage. Her work went national, and she often reminded others, "Don't be afraid to speak up, even if your voice shakes. Someone out there needs to hear it." The story of that debate night was retold for years to come. Not as a moment of defeat or humiliation, but as a rare, honest exchange that shifted the culture, proving that real strength is measured not in how you silence your opponent, but in how you build each other up. Years later, the night Candace Owens tried to shame Jasmine Crockett had become the stuff of legend, a defining moment not only for the two women but for a country too often divided by noise and ego. The video was shown in classrooms and leadership workshops as a prime example of what could happen when conviction met humility, when challenge met compassion. Jasmine Crockett's legacy grew. She became a symbol of resilience, proof that you could hold your ground, defend your record, and still open your heart to those who disagreed with you. Her speeches inspired a new generation of leaders to value truth, vulnerability, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even under fire. Candace Owens's journey was transformed as well. She didn't change her principles, but her willingness to acknowledge and learn from the debate earned her respect from unexpected quarters. Her future debates were marked by more listening, more dialogue, and a new sense of responsibility toward the power of her words. Mariah, the young woman whose question changed the course of the night, became a national advocate. Her story showed that a single, trembling voice could turn the tide, and she spent her life encouraging others to speak up for justice and fairness. In the end, what started as an attempt to shame became an enduring lesson in leadership. The debate's legacy was simple, but powerful: listening can change everything. And for those who watched, remembered, or found courage in that moment, it was a reminder that sometimes, the most important thing you can do on any stage is to listen, with intention, with empathy, and with hope for something better.